The American Adoption Congress, 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991, in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape 60A.
It's very cold.
I'll hold this.
Oh, wear it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm supposed to wear it, okay. This is Anne Mio Bruning, and she was born in Korea in 1960, the year of the rat, and adopted into a U.S. white family in 1966 when she was 5 years old. Mioke lived in New Jersey, went to high school in Rhode Island, art school in Virginia, and lived in Boston for 6 years. She finished her BA in poetry in Vermont and recently moved to New York City. Mioke has been active in the international adoption reform movement for 7 years. She has had poems and articles published and has spoken out extensively on adoption issues nationally and internationally. Mioke is active in the Asian American community and is currently chasing her MSW at Smith College School for Social Work. She is also currently completing a book on her own experience in co-editing a National Asian Pacific Lesbian Anthology, both of which are due to be out in 1993. In her spare time, Mioke manages to have fun and dreams of living in San Francisco. Eventually, she hopes to become a therapist in post-adoption services for internationally adopted children, adolescents, adults, and their families, as well as a therapist for lesbians of color, specializing in cross-cultural issues.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. And
Do you have to wear that now?
I thought they gave us only one.
Just leave it on the table.
I've got a sign-up sheet for people who want articles that I've written. I don't have copies, so if you want articles, you can pass this around and sign up. Some of the topics that I wanted to talk about have to do with like naming and use of language and adoption, particularly international adoptions, the adoption story versus the birth story, and the 5 elements of the social implications of international adoptions in the U.S. I did mention in my bio that I worked at an international adoption agency in Boston, Massachusetts for 10 months and consequently brought 5 children over each time. I went back twice, and then the first time I went back was in '84, and I did participate on the Motherland Tour with other adult Korean adoptees. And working at this adoption agency, I learned a lot, some of which I did not like, but it was very important for me to learn. And one of the things that I learned was the difference between Oriental and Asian children. And when I became very politically active in the Asian American communities in Boston and New York, I used to call myself Oriental for years, and then I realized that it was very derogatory because Oriental comes from the word the Orient, and everything in the 1600s, the royal imperialists from the Western European countries exported goods from the Orient, which was anything that was east of Western Europe. So, and the people were considered just Oriental. They were just blocked into this one huge category, the Orientals. And when the U.S. Was colonized, they took that name, they took that title, that word, and they called everything east of Europe Oriental as well. And Oriental things are objects that you buy, like rugs and vases, but they are not people. So I just wanted to make that comment. That's very important to realize that when you adopt a child from Korea or another Asian country like the Philippines, they're not Orientals, they're Asians. In regards to naming, I was renamed Anne, and and my parents had the foresight to maintain my Korean name as my middle name, which I reclaimed and use predominantly now. And that was really important. I really appreciate my parents for doing that, for having that kind of sensitivity to realize that I would possibly eventually want to reclaim my name. Naming, as I think for adoptees, is really important. It's part of our identity, and it's very crucial to our sense of self and our psyches. And before I continue, I want to know how many adopted parents are. Can you raise your hands? Okay. I thought there would be more, but that's good.
You have a lot of competition in this time slot.
I guess I do.
Well, we know you really want to be here then.
The next thing I wanted to talk about is like the use of language in adoption. And some of these are familiar and some of these are maybe not so familiar. The adoption story is really important and crucial to adopted people because it replaces the birth story, or it is the birth in some ways, symbolically, and which I have a lot of problems with because a lot of adopted parents believe, and the adoption workers believe, that the child's life begins after the adoption. And I was adopted at the age of 5, as Midori said, and I had a previous life that was very vital to my growth and my development. And I think that adopted people, particularly me, I'll speak for myself because I can only speak for myself as a Korean adopted person, but the use of language has really affected me in having to learn English as well as, and being forced to forget my Korean language, that I realized how much words can be, so the power of words has such an impact on how people feel and think about adoption. And I was told early on as a 5-year-old that I was abandoned, and I wasn't. I don't know if I was abandoned. But they need to, it seems like legally you have to put the word abandoned on your forms and your documents so that you can be considered adoptable. So that does a real number on a child's psyche, knowing that they're abandoned or believing that they've been abandoned when it might not in fact be true. Which also leads to, well, if you were abandoned, you must have been unwanted. And this reminds me of a concert that these famous rock stars had been doing for for the children of Romania. And they call it, the title of the concert is Nobody's Child, which is such a misconception because these children are somebody's children, which just feeds into the whole stereotyping, misconception, propaganda-based misleading information that these children who happen to be, who are relinquished in one form or another are now available for adoption. So I was considered unwanted, and my parents said, well, you were really wanted by us. And which also just makes me feel like, well, I was, in order to be wanted, in order to be unwanted, I was also, and to be wanted, I had to be given up before, which leads into the chosen child, which I have a real hard time with, as opposed to the unchosen child. And as a youngster, I have on my birth certificate it says orphan. I don't know if I was an orphan. Technically speaking, an orphan is a child who has both parents who are dead or missing. And I don't know if both of my parents, either one of my parents or both, are dead. So these are really important issues to be able to, words to remember when you tell your child in the adoption story for your child. Also, third world, minority, and underdeveloped. I have real problems with third world because it's U.S. imperialism, cultural imperialist statement saying that the U.S. and Western Europe are first world nations, and I think Russia's second world, and the other countries following that are third world, and I have a real problem with that. As also the word minority. Globally speaking, Asians are the majority. We claim 1/3 of this world's population, and I'm not going to let anybody forget that. So it's really important to realize that in this society, yes, I am considered a minority, but it's very derogatory, which has to do with superiority, inferiority, majority, and minority. An underdeveloped in whose terms, by whose standards, in what perspective. So you really need to, I think it's really important to question, what does underdeveloped mean? And when you're telling your child that they're from he or she is from an underdeveloped world, underdeveloped country, that puts really a negative stereotype onto that country when you don't really know what the economic status of the country is, except through media, which is often misleading anyway. Deserving, these words, deserving, grateful, obligated, and lucky, they haunt me to this day, and they will continue. I think that all my life I was considered lucky. I was told that I was very lucky to be adopted, and I don't think that a child who is given an opportunity to have a home and a loving family is any luckier than a child who was born into a home. And I think that every child is deserving. So to place who's luckier and who's not is a real judgment call, and I think it made me feel like I was obligated and grateful, had to be grateful, and felt enormous amount of guilt for being sad, for feeling loss, displacement, grief, mourning. And I think that I don't think luck had anything to do with it. I think it was fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it. But luck is not a word that comes to my mind in terms of my whole experience.
Well, it's insulting. It means, like, if you hadn't gotten adopted or hadn't been cute enough in the picture, I mean, what does that mean for you as a person? Were you like a second-class citizen or something, and you just don't really deserve it, but you're lucky, so now you do deserve it?
Right.
It's so insulting.
And I think this all comes into having the adoption story is one of the most, probably the most crucial aspect of your child's experience. And I have so many missing pieces of the puzzle that I still to this day ask my parents, what was it like, what was the experience, how my arrival, when did I start speaking English, I remember vague parts of this, but it's validating, it's reaffirming, it's the only way that I can feel grounded and whole, as much as I can feel whole. And it's part of the, for me, it's part of the healing process, and having the missing, and knowing what the missing parts of my adoption story is having gone back to Korea, having being very active in the Asian American community and reclaiming my Asian identity, which I struggled and fought for years. It just wasn't handed to me. I was rejected by the Asian community and the Korean community most specifically, and I always felt alienated from the white community. And the 5 elements, I've written extensively about the social implications of international adoptions in the U.S., and the 5 elements that I think a lot of people don't recognize include political, economic, cultural, social, racial / racist. And I really believe that in terms of political, it's not a coincidence that the U.S. has intervened in every country that there's a program of open for adoptions at an international level. Korea is the oldest and largest program. It's been open since 1953, when, as a post-World War, post-Korean War effort to save the children through Harry Holt, as we both mentioned. And every single country, well, almost every single country that the U.S. has intervened or been stationed at, but military forces at, a program has opened up. And it's not coincidental to me that these children are being taken and shipped to the U.S. And it's political. It has to do with politics. It has to do with the U.S. imperialistic viewpoints that the U.S. is better placed to raise a child. And they go in there with military interventions, and they bomb or, kill, people, their parents or the families, or don't provide them, funds for them to keep their children. The U.S. military has given, the U.S. government has given military aid to the Contras, who then kill the Sandinistas, who then, and a lot of these children that are coming from Latin American countries are children of Sandinistas and the, people in villages and the cities.
Don't forget
So-
to mention how the economics work.
That's next. The economics is when Midori and I were adopted, there was a whole different reason why we were adopted. We were a post-war product. I was a post-war product. We both realized last night that we were talking together last night. We both realized that we were at the same adoption. At the orphanage together at the same time, and we must have played together because we were the same age group. So that was for me. It was real reaffirming. It was really important to know. Economically, I think that if there isn't money involved, this program would not. The Korean program would not be existing.
Continuing.
It would not be continuing, and Korea economically is a very powerful force, and it's developed. It's not developing. It's still developing, but it's developed, and it's an industrialized nation, and technologically, industrially. And yes, it's got its poverty, but so does the U.S. I work in the Bronx. I see it every day. So economically, also, in terms of economic, it hits home for the birth mother in Korea and other countries, because if there isn't money available for the birth mother to keep the child, they have to relinquish. And Korea, I know for a fact, coerces birth mothers into not having a choice to keep their children, because they do not provide any social services. They do not provide sex education or birth control. They do not allow healthy, safe abortions, and they do not do domestic adoptions in the way
They don't
that
provide medical care.
they do not provide medical care. They will not give them education or a job or housing unless they give up their child. The foster care system in Korea is very well established and very large. However, Korea would rather ship a child out to the U.S. or Norway or Western European countries than keep the child in foster care with a Korean foster care.
Because
Parents.
it's become such an economic issue, because the families pay money for the adoption, and part of that money then goes to the Korean government whenever.
Well,
a
we all
child
know
is-
that
Yeah.
it costs $10,000 to $15,000 a child to adopt. Now, with the paperwork, the airfare, the medical expenses, $3,000 of that money, which has not been documented, but I know about it because I've worked in an adoption agency, goes to the Korean government. Now, the Korean government and the U.S. refuse to admit that. There's no information about that. The Korean government appoints directors specifically for these adoption agencies, specifically Holt. So you know that this is government-run agencies. And what I'm trying to say is that this is a very glorified baby-selling, marketing technique that's been going on for now. It's 40 years. It's a huge industry and we are now going into South America and Latin American countries, and the Philippines, Azores, India, Thailand, Bangkok, and they're trying to start a program up in China and Hong Kong. Meanwhile, we have 35,000, at least 30 children, 1,000 children, maybe even more. I mean, I know at least 30,000 children in this country alone who are black or mixed race and are not considered adoptable.
Why?
Because racism. Because nobody wants to adopt a black child.
But also it's
I mean, I work for an adoption agency in Louisiana, and we have lots of couples that adopt biracial babies.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
You know, they really do. They call us from all over, and we have a hard time. We don't have a lot of birth mothers that come to us that are carrying biracial children. But the ones that we do, they are quickly adopted. I don't, you know, they just, I think up north, I don't know, they're told that they cannot adopt a white child, or it'll take them years and years and years.
Right.
So then they in turn want to adopt a biracial, which is fine. I mean, it's,
Right. Well, I have problems with that too, but the social implications, the cultural implications. Let me finish this, and then we can open up the floor for questions and answers. I want to leave at least an hour for open discussion, but I need to get through this, and Midori needs to go next. The cultural aspects. So that's the economic aspects. We can go into it later on. The cultural aspects have to do with. From my personal experience, I was not only denied my birth mother, but I was denied my cultural heritage. I was ripped away from it, which took me years and years to deal with. I'm still dealing with it. I'll always be dealing with it. I suffered profound loss and separation and identity issues. And I consider myself a survivor and of trauma, major trauma. And these children who are being adopted now, they have it a little bit easier because there are many more of them. And there are adoption conferences like this. There are people like Midori and I speaking out. There are articles written, books, and there are cultural camps and events that you can go to and support groups. However, the child, you can do as much as you possibly can and still not enough in some ways. My parents tried their best, and it was still very painful. It was really hard. So that's the cultural aspect. The social aspect has to do with socially, it's much more acceptable to adopt a child now from another country. In fact, in some ways, it's become a trend. Also, I mean, not only in the heterosexual community, but also in the lesbian gay community, it's very much of a trend because adoptions, international adoptions, is much easier. As this woman was saying, it's much more accessible, and there are many more children available who are biracial and internationally adopted rather than the healthy white blue ribbon babies that are not available. So socially, I question the intent of these adoptive parents, pre-adoptive parents who are seeking to adopt a child from another country after they've gone through the grueling mill and painful experience of going through the other routes, which is trying to find a healthy white infant. Racially, I think I touched on that a little bit before, and I think that a lot of adoptive parents come up to me and say, what can I do to make it easier for my child? How can I prevent these experiences from happening to my child that happened to you? How do I protect my child? Well, you can't. But you can do certain things that that can help the child understand their racial background. I say, I mean, my biggest instinct, my most immediate instinct is move to a city. Do it now. Don't even think about it. If you have adopted a child from another country and you live in an all-white area, move to a city. Move to an urban area. It's hard. It's a struggle. It's brutal at times. I live in the Bronx. I know it's a grind, but do it for your child. But it's unrealistic for a lot of people, and I realize that. I understand that. Another thing is read as much as you can. Learn the child's cultural language, food, whatever you can possibly do, because it's as much as you can possibly do. And not to say shove the child into, push a child and force a child into becoming, Latin overnight. Latin identified overnight is, it's this process. It's all a process. It all takes time. And there are children who reach an age through adolescence where they don't want to deal with their identity. They just want to fit in. They want to acculturate. They want to assimilate, as I did when I was younger. But to allow the child options, because the child didn't have any other options before. They don't have any options. They didn't have their option to choose to decide whether they wanted to come here to the U.S. So if you can give them the options and be open about it as much as possible, and talk, excuse me, talk about it in whatever way possible, do so. I'm going to read 2 poems and then hand it over to Midori. The first one is called They Said. They said, smile for the camera, open your eyes, they are squinting. But my eyes weren't squinting. They said, stop crying, stop feeling bad. Those kids who call you chink and flat-faced don't know anything. Besides, you probably provoked them. They said, feel lucky, you were chosen, really meaning I was also given up. They said, we are offended. You have everything, so be happy, be appreciative, and never let the tears show. They said, you don't belong here. Where are you from? Do you speak English? Do you like America? As if I just landed from a distant galaxy. They said everything I hoped and dreamed and prayed they wouldn't. They still do. The next poem is called Heart Murmur. When I was a child, I was told that my heart beats differently. It's not like a normal one, something like it skips or echoes, something like that. Tell me, what does a normal heart sound like? What does it hear in the cold blackness of cryptic, bleak nights? How does it respond when my heart once knew and listened for 9 liquid months in a muffled fetal sac, and for 3 instinctive postnatal months nestled next to the milky warmth of her swollen breasts, but does not remember her futile, featureless face? How does a heart respond and beat to the aching memories of the profound murmurs of my wretched difference and others' numbing indifference, of the wrenching separation between a mother and her child? And I wonder, does she have a heart murmur too? Midori comes from San Luis Obispo, where she lives with her husband David and children Joshua 5 and Michael 1.5. She was adopted by a white Christian family when she was 3 after spending 2 years in a Holt orphanage in Korea. She graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a bachelor's in English literature and married a year later. Her interests include writing, painting, sewing, family, and music. She's a professional musician. She has produced the video, I'm Midori, with Parenting Resources in Tustin, California.
Kind of to continue on with what you're talking about, of how to deal with a child from another race, I guess I'm a lot more, I guess I just kind of give up a lot more, maybe. Asking a family to move to the city and to do what I would consider fairly radical things is asking a lot of the family, and I think it just puts the child under that much more strain, obligation. There isn't enough feeling of obligation in the beginning. But I kind of feel like one of the problems that I had growing up was my parents would try to say, oh, well, there's somebody who's Korean, walking down the street, and you're like, well, so what? And it was just such an unnatural thing. And I think to try to kind of force or shove down the throats of a kid their culture when they've grown up in a white family is just really an odd thing to do. It's never very comfortable. It's one thing to say that, to learn about it and to be aware of it and to appreciate the culture. But it's another thing to automatically start shoving down, like for me, Korean culture, as something completely foreign to me. And for me, at least, for my personality, it's maybe better to just wait and just allow the child to know that acknowledge that there's some differences, and to let the child, when all these questions tend to come up in puberty, allow the child to do the exploring when they want to, on their terms. I think one of the funniest experiences I had was I grew up in a very white area, and I was considered very, very ugly because I was Asian. Not, I almost thought I was deformed or something. And none of the guys would date me at my high school. And so I really had this really warped sense that somehow I wasn't a real person. And we took a field trip down to Chinatown in San Francisco. And I was standing on the street corner, and there were guys driving down the street, Asian guys driving down the street, whistling and doing catcalls. I'm like, who are they doing that? Oh, that's me, I'm just standing here. And so that's when I realized that, there's probably something else going on here, and that maybe I should explore these guys that are so smart to think that I'm beautiful. So one of the things I do want to talk about is adopting Caucasian children as opposed to children of color, our feelings about it. I guess one thing that we both feel pretty strongly about is that Korea really doesn't need to have children being adopted out. They need to develop social systems within their country that addresses these issues of helping the birth mother, of giving the birth mother more options.
So do the other countries.
And the other countries. But I think there's real need in some other countries. Like I said in the outline, I think Romania has a very large need. There are unwanted children, definitely unwanted children there that are put in institutions. And
It's not true.
that they're being left behind. And there's other countries where there's great devastation going on, where there's more of a need. And there's a need within this country to look into adoptions. And I'm sure, people here have looked into it. But I just want to say that I would really push more for domestic adoptions and thinking about other countries other than Korea, because the work's been done there. And a lot of what I want to address here is the confusion that happens around international adoptions. One of the big confusing things, obviously, is being brought up in a white home. You learn to speak like a white person. You talk on the phone, and they think they're talking to a white person. And then they look at you, and they think, oh my gosh, she's Asian, and so they put you in another category. And people are very confused when you go to school, when you're trying to date somebody. Trying to find a date is, there's a whole stereotype of Asian women, and this whole erotica thing, and I would hate that when guys would come up to me and say, oh, I just love Asian women. And you just want to slap them and say, well, I'm not one of them. But it causes confusion in dating. The men think that they're getting one thing and they're getting another. They're stereotyping you. I often think of that movie called The Jerk with Steve Martin, where the family's got rhythm and he's like completely off in center field with Lawrence Welk, because that's very much the way it was in my family. They were not artistically oriented. They weren't musically oriented. There was a piano in the house, but there was a piano because it was a nice piece of furniture. It had nothing to do with the fact that anyone was musical. But I looked at that thing and said, I want to play that thing. It's a waste for it to just be sitting there. So I got up and got a book on music and just started, going down the lines and plunking it out myself. I wanted to do it so badly. And I have a lot of musicality that Lord knows my family, that I was adopted into, they don't understand it at all, and they don't understand what I do. And artistically, there's no art in the family, and all of a sudden I would come out with these paintings out of nowhere. And I think I was growing up in a time where everybody believed that a child was a piece of clay and you could mold it into whatever you felt you wanted to do with it. And I think I was a real example of that. The child has a lot of things it brings to in its life. And so there's those problems with like hobbies and things, but there's also the things like religion. Like I was saying, Holt Orphanage thinks I'm very much a failure because I didn't turn out Christian. But I think there's a lot of, to me, religion is a very personal thing, what you feel comfortable with, and at what level you feel comfortable with saying that things that happen to you in your life, how philosophical you are and how you deal with stress and different things. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with genetics. Religion is not a sort of thing that you can just foist on somebody. They have to come to whatever religion they feel comfortable. I mean, that's my feeling. And I was, thrust into a, very fundamentalist Christian family, and, I was forced to go to church and things that felt very uncomfortable. And I thought I felt uncomfortable because I didn't like the people that were at church. But I think it more had to do with my background, in that there was something in me that just didn't feel comfortable with such a rigid sense of what the shoulds in life. And I guess I'm a little bit more, I would like to believe I'm a little bit more open to what should and should not be. I would like for the whole should word to be out of our language, but and the confusion out of international adoption that happens, I talked about dating, but then, Lord, trying to find a husband. I tried to find Asian men that would date me. I mean, I would give them the eye. They were scared to death of me. They thought I was just weird. And I thought they were pretty weird too, because they were expecting something. And every time I opened my mouth, I'm a complete giveaway that there's something really wrong with me or something really different. So I ended up marrying a Jewish man who, I guess the reason why it works so well for us is that, being Jewish is sort of a minority within themselves, but they are white. And I grew up in a white family, but I was a minority, in our sense of the word. And so for me, he was like the best fit, and he has extraordinary parents that are just very accepting. He's very accepting, he's very non-judgmental. And to find someone who was very non-judgmental and would look at me and not make a judgment about me before talking to me was incredibly hard. And I could do some male bashing right now, but I won't. No. And then the other confusion is employment, and I think this has been the hardest crux to get over for me, is employment. I come walking into an interview and they think that they're getting an Asian, and I keep on trying to tell them, I'm not Asian, I'm white, I really am, I just look Asian. And forever people will hire me, and you have to walk a very thin tightrope. As women, you walk in and if you do the same things that a man does, if you work overtime, if you're a woman, oftentimes it's seen as, oh, she's not getting her work done, that's why she has to work overtime. Whereas a man working overtime, oh, he's so industrious, he wants to get ahead for his family. Well, there's the same kind of confusion going on as an Asian white person, because then you're dealing with, you're a woman, you're perceived as Asian, but you act like a white person, and it causes tremendous confusion at work until they get to know you.
Could you give us an example, Mary, of how that works?
I think the most difficult thing is, it's happened a lot with male bosses mostly, but they just expect you to be more, I guess the only word is subservient. They really expect you to walk in and serve them coffee and to say, to just nod your head and go on with whatever you're doing. That's what they expect of Asians. And so if you're a white Asian, as I call myself, when you first come onto a job, for me, it's always been very important to soft pedal, back pedal a lot. And at first walk in, and when they ask you to do something that is what I would consider inappropriate, instead of going in like maybe a white person could get away with, of saying, that's not appropriate, or I really don't feel like doing that. Smiling at them and saying, do you really want me to do that? Or more allowing them more of an opening so that they can gracefully get out of the situation. Don't just directly confront. Yeah, confrontation for me has never worked very well. I like to confront. I'm very confrontational, but not in like employment situations. In employment situations, I have to be very careful and just say, did you mean for that to sound that way? Or maybe you want to kind of, maybe somebody might think twice if you said it that way. Maybe we could do it this way. To really, more than ever, backpedal than maybe a lot of people would. So that's been a real confusing issue for me, and it's only recently that I think that I'm dealing with it better. And because, see, what happens is, and you know, as a woman, you know, you go in and, oh, she's aggressive. She's not assertive, she's always aggressive. Well, the Asian woman comes in and she's more so aggressive. That woman, she's just so off the wall. And so finally to go on a job and just say, oh, you know, she's a nice person, but she's assertive. That's been really a hard thing. And that's kind of beyond where a lot of these, the conferences talk about. They talk about sometimes adolescent issues, but they don't talk about as adults, full-fledged adults, what you have to deal with out in the market. It can be really tough. The other confusion that I've found has arisen since I've had children is my son, he's 5 and he's in school, and he's, you know, half white, half Asian, which now it seems to be sort of a trendy thing to be kind of this half-breed. But where it's caused confusion is he's said to people, you know, that he's half Korean and half Asian, and people just look at him and they shake their heads. They don't even understand what he's talking about. And then they see me and they realize, but he doesn't act anything Asian. And so that's very confusing. It's confusing for him because he has asked me, he says, well, if I'm half Korean, what's Korean? And I had to tell him, quite frankly, there's not a whole lot here. And I had to tell him my background and stuff. But it's a hard thing for kids to understand and to look like a half-breed, but not be a half-breed. So all I can say in bringing up all these things is that as parents and as people around adoption is, you can't force anything. You can't tell a child how they're going to deal with a situation, because I've never been very successful at it. Because you know how people are going to be what they're going to be. If some people are automatically angry in their lives. They're just angry people and they take everything the wrong way and there's nothing you can do about it. And some people are those happy-go-lucky people that just, you know, you can give, they'll just do anything. They're very moldable. So I think every child personally has to come to terms with it, what they feel comfortable with. But I guess for me, I would think that the only way to handle it is to be open. Do a lot of nodding of your head and, of course, reading and being aware so the child knows that you respect what their background is and let them come to you. And just acknowledge to yourself that there are differences. My mom never acknowledged, or my parents never really acknowledged that there would be these genetic differences. And so when I would come out with these things, she would try to like acknowledge that, oh, that must come from your aunt on your father's side, twice removed, or you know, some really odd connection, instead of saying, you know, well, maybe your mom was very artistic, or maybe your dad was really musical or something.
This is the end of side A. Please turn your tape over and continue on side B.
Then the other thing is, as I said in the video, and as I noted in the syllabus thing, is to read, what's that book, the Indian book? Oh, I can't even think of it, it goes out of my mind. Read, of course, Cider House Rules, and then I quoted Jewel in the Crown. Because in Jewel in the Crown, and if you saw the movie on TV, it expresses very well. He's an Indian man who was educated in England, and he spoke perfect, impeccable English. And if you had a screen between you, you swore to God you were speaking to a perfect Englishman. And his father wanted him
he said, I want you to sound like an Englishman because the English really put a lot of stock into how they sound. And if you can only sound like a perfect Englishman, you'll be accepted. And of course, that wasn't the case. But there's this one scene in both the movie and the book where he goes into a little store when he comes back to India. And he walks in and the clerk's not paying attention to him and he asks him, do you have some Pears soap? And the clerk is not really paying attention and he's going, and then he looks up at him and he takes a double take and he says, you can go on down to the bazaar and get some. And it wasn't until he looked at him, and there's that whole confusion of people thinking something and seeing something and then making a second judgment when they see you. And then the other book that doesn't have so much to do with international adoptions, but I just think it's a great book, is John Irving's Cider House Rules. The first chapter of it deals with adoption. There's this child called Homer who gets sent out many times to different adoptive parents, and none of them ever quite gel, and he ends up coming back to the orphanage. That's why he's called Homer, because he keeps on coming home. And it's, I think, a very truthful image of adoption, and that it's not all, wonderful roses. This family, this child comes walking and everybody loves him automatically, and he automatically loves everybody there, and they're also grateful, and everything turns out happily ever after. It's a very uncomfortable first chapter in that adoption is dealing with humans, with their frailties and their inadequacies, but with their good intentions, but the intentions don't necessarily gel with the child's personality. And so I think it brings a real reality to adoption. Do you have anything to
open
add?
up the floor?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. I am in a clinician who works in a counseling center. We don't do adoptions there, but we do all kinds of counseling. And I'm really astounded at how many pre-adopted parents or people who are thinking about adoption, the little thought that goes into adopting a child from Korea. I mean, it's almost non-existent. There's a little baby and it's much faster to adopt a baby from Korea. And they look at each other and think, well, that'll fit, that'll be okay. And I'm wondering what you would think would be important if one were counseling people who are thinking about adopting a child from Korea. What would you think would be really important for them to think about or to know about themselves, to be part of their family? When we've done what we call transracial adoptions, with families who are, for example, considering a black child, part of the exploration is, do you live in a neighborhood that's integrated? Are there black children at school? Do you have friends who are black? What is your connection with other people? It's harder, obviously, unless you live in Los Angeles or other places like that where there really is a Korean community. I realize I'm sort of dumping this, so if you haven't thought it out.
They already answered it, so before you came in.
Well, basically,
The formal starting.
Yeah, can I just make a response? I would just say, I don't know when you came in, but that tape that Metairie has made, a tape that talks about her own experiences going through adoption, her life and so on, that Parenting Resources in Huston, California. I didn't know that they sold it, but that's, if they sell it.
It's available to sell.
And what's great is, because I saw that as an adoptive parent, considering adopting a child from another country, there's just a real learning experience for me. And I will have to agree with you that people who do adopting, they just, as one example, a woman who adopted a little baby from Guatemala, and I happened to be with her when we were in Guatemala together, and she says, she says, sometimes I walk around and I look at the Guatemalan men, she says, and I can't quite realize that this little baby is going to grow up to look like a Guatemalan man. And it's true. I mean, she's a very intelligent person, but you can't really get it, And I do the same thing with Miguel, my little boy who's from Peru, because, we're kind of fair and blonde and all this. And here's this little dark-haired, little olive-skinned little boy, and I keep thinking, this is going to be really funny when he graduates from high school, And here he's going to have these blonde parents, and he's going to be a a Latin-looking man, you know. So it's hard to get that, you know. It's just because we don't normally think like that, and we have to grow into understanding those realities.
I think we talked about this last night, that you know, there are some real important experiences that adoptive children need to go through. For me, it's having children myself, but also I would really like to go back to Korea. And I'm not sure that there's a way to prepare a parent. I mean, you can't, I don't think it's fair to ask a family to move to the inner city or move to where there's going to be a lot of people, just because it's unnatural to them and it's going to cause strain in the family. I think, you know, that there would be extra strain if the parents don't really want to do that and they're just doing it for the child. But to set some money aside so they can go back to their country. One of the most healing experiences for me was to walk downtown in Chinatown in San Francisco and just walk with a bunch of people that were as short as me, and they all had black hair. It was great. I felt like, gosh, there's other people like me, and even though I am alone and my family's white and stuff, there are people out there. And so, I mean, as long as the parents recognize that there's a difference, and when that time comes in the adolescent's life or in their early adult life, that they need to, you know, get out there and maybe go back to their birth country. And a lot of it, I don't think, can ever resolve itself until they have children. Personally, I mean, there's so much that happened after I had kids. I mean, because you can look at this kid and it's your child and it's your family. And I really never felt like I had family. Not in the real sense. I mean, I really could never feel that until I had my own child. Not even my husband could really give that sense of family to me. And so for adoptees that never have children, they miss out on a family experience that I would never want anyone to miss out on. So,
have you talked extensively with other Korean adoptees to get a sense of how your story and your response to your experience compares with theirs?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question for the tape.
Okay.
The question is, have we talked to other Korean adoptees to share our experiences and stories?
confirm them.
To confirm them.
Compare, you know, like a wide variety of stories.
I have a few friends. I started a support group. I co-founded a support group in Boston with other adoptees of color who are specifically actually Asian. A couple of women are from China, and three of us, it's a very small group, three of us are Korean. And actually, I knew everyone before I started the group, so it was very easy to start the group. The co-leader, the co-founder, the other co-founder didn't know anybody, so it was a real new experience for her. And for her, actually, I was the first Korean adopted person she ever met. Because I've been in the adoption movement for 7 years, I have a lot more affiliations, but there aren't too many. I really believe that the Korean adopted adults who are our peers are very few, because we were right at the beginning of the adoption industry. So when Dory she was like 1963, so she was one of the 1,000th, one of the first 1,000 children to be adopted. I was the 1,500th, or around that. That's what I figured out. Since then, there have been over 300,000 children adopted into the U.S. from Korea. So we were right at the beginning. So our peers are very few, and we're very closeted because we all have American names. I can't find them on universities or in towns or in campuses or in organizations. Korean adopted people do not identify, for the most part, as
There's a lot of stigma to coming out and speaking about it, because there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of uncomfortable issues around it. And I don't know if this is genetic or what it is, but Asians are considered the model minority, and and don't speak out a lot. And so there aren't a whole lot of articulate Asian adoptees. I mean, you start whittling down the pool, and it gets small very fast. But of the Korean adoptees that I know, I don't know a lot of happy stories, unfortunately. They've all had major drug dependency problems. But I think it more has to do with
the environment that, you know, being brought up in a very, all of them were brought, that I know of, were brought up in very strict Christian homes. And a lot of denial went on with the parents that there was any difference, that this child was going to become American, you know, 150%. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that the Korean, the children that are being adopted now out of Korea, it's real different. And I know a lot from San Luis Obispo and in the area that the parents are, you know, very open, and they want to know about the culture, and they realize that there's difference. So when you say compare, it's like, well, we've got to be sure it's within the same year. It won't be the same experience.
When you say these 300,000, is that all through the whole agency?
I think pretty much.
In Korea, the
Yeah.
entire country of Korea, 300,000
is?
children to the U.S.
There's one other
But those are all
organization.
through Hope.
There are several organizations.
Yeah, there's Family Vision, or what is that one?
I'm not sure, but there are other organizations. This is my own estimation, because
A lot of it's
we were
not
talking
published.
about, it's not documented, so you can quote me and nobody will support me on it. So if you want to, you can quote me, go right ahead. Hope will have my head, but that's all right. At this point, because I placed 300 children in international adoptions in Boston. That's 1 year. You multiply that by 30 years times 50 states. You come out with 300,000 children in 30 years. This is average. Okay?
That's probably a real
some
low
less,
number.
some more, but this is average. This is what you call the means. The means percentage is average, 300,000 children. I'm not even talking about the children that go to Western European countries. I'm not talking about Norway, which is the second largest percentage of children from Korea go to Norway, which is the second most racist country in the world, next to the U.S., which is the first.
Why Norway?
Why the
Because
U.S.?
they have very long names.
Just as a guess, a lot of those countries have have birth control, and people can get abortions, and so there are very few babies available for adoption.
And they have money.
Yeah.
Well, the quote-unquote first world countries.
Yeah.
Any other, you had a question?
If you've answered this before I came, I don't repeat it. But like as Ruben Panner was suggesting in a general session some days ago, that it's important, I think, that we challenge kind of the basic premises of adoption in some ways. And when it comes to international adoption, instead of looking at like how we can make it better, I mean, isn't it an issue of really challenging whether it should be going on at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I think a number of countries, as I understand it, and I'm certainly no expert in international adoption, view this as another example of colonial exploitation of people with few resources.
Good. Yeah, I agree. Actually, the comment is on tape. Should international adoptions be challenged as something that shouldn't even be going on, as opposed to be continuing and being improved? And my response to that is, yes. Through my notes, I really agree. To me, I'm anti-international adoptions. And if it has to continue, and it will, because I'm only one person speaking out against it. I've made a lot of enemies, mostly of whom are adopted parents, and adoption agencies who disagree with me, because my belief is, if it's going to continue, then the parents who are considering, people who consider adopting a child from another country, really need to understand why. They need to ask themselves, why have they dealt with their infertility? Have they dealt with their racism? Have they dealt with the fact that they will become an interracial family? Have they dealt with where they live? Yes, where they live. What kind of exposure and what kind of stereotypes do they have towards the country that they are adopting this child from? If that has been addressed, and it has minimally, at best, so far, then I really believe that if you want to save, quote unquote, save a child and rescue a child, which is much of the premise of a lot of these adoptive parents, and I'm sorry to say, but that you want to save a child, then you send money to keep that, to make sure that the mother can keep the child in the country. You send money to develop programs so that the parents, birth parents, and the villages or wherever they're living, or the horrible ravaged neighborhoods where they're living, can keep the children. Or you provide better services so that the birth parents, that the birth father has to take action for their responsibility if it's quote unquote unwanted pregnancy. You have to be really aware of what the politics, the political, economic, and social backgrounds and situations of these countries that you're adopting, that you want to adopt from. It's a travesty against women. It's a travesty against children. It's child abuse, it's neglect, it's misogyny, and it's a feminist women's issue. And we're talking about reproductive rights. We're talking about the rights of children that aren't being given to them because who wants the children? White, pre-adoptive, infertile, mostly, for the most part, sometimes. Parents, people want these children. Why? And so the premise is, oh, well, we're thinking on the best behalf in the best interest of the child. That to me doesn't wash. That to me is cultural imperialism saying we're a better nation than any other rest, and we have the money to prove it, and we're going to dish out $15,000, and we're going to fly first class down to, or coach, down to the village, pick up the child and come back, and we'll live happily ever after. And I know for a fact that in 10 years, 5 to 10 years, these children will be growing up with major, major psychological problems.
Well, I question international adoption as maybe what I would consider a last resource. I don't think I'm against it completely because I think that there are countries out there that are in desperate need. I think that adoption is a valid option, and international adoption can be a valid option, but it should, in my mind, it should be really a well thought out decision, that you really have thought of the things surrounding it. I don't think it should be as prevalent maybe as it is today and so easily accessible, that anyone who just can't get a child in the United States as quickly as they'd like to can just go and get another child without really thinking about what they're doing. And if they go, it should be to a country where there really is dire need for that. I think that there's a lot of loss on the part of the child, like, in both our cases, losing our culture. But, you have to weigh out, I know in some sense it can be taken as imperialism, but on a human basis, on an individual basis, I don't think it's fair to really judge that adoptive parent or that child on the basis of what's going on with the whole country. That child is hungry, and there is real need in countries for real help. We're not talking about politics, we're talking about food for that child. And you have to weigh out, there's a decision as adults that has to be made. I mean, can countries allow other countries to allow their children to starve to death? It's nice to be able to say help the birth mother and get that birth mother help, but the problem is not necessarily just sending them money. There's social issues within the country that are keeping that mother from keeping the child, and you can work on those, and everyone should work on trying to make the social systems better within other countries. But if a child does have to be adopted out, know what's going on, and then be very open to that child's differences and sensitivity towards that child. But I don't think that international adoption is necessarily a bad thing.
And I think that same argument was made, and I'm from Canada, so we have the native Canadians, and there's Oriental adopters too, of course.
Asians? You have to be careful about saying
that. But I think that same argument was made in terms of placement of black children, Afro-American children, in white U.S. basic
Right.
homes.
Where do you draw the line?
Until the Association of Black Social Workers and a number of others said we shouldn't be doing this.
But,
And those kids are in foster care.
Can I just respond?
I don't know.
See, what to me I find is so ridiculous. My feeling is I would have to, if I try to figure out where I fall in the lines of all of this range of thought, I would have to say that I would I would kind of come down where Mary is that, because I know when I myself was in Peru, I went through all this stuff. Here I was an adoptive mother down there, you know, and God, I saw all these poor women giving up their children, and some of them were extreme poverty and so on, and some of it yet, anyway, it was a mess. I'd go into that for an hour or so. But the point is that even as an adoptive mother, I was going through this whole horrible stuff. Is this shit, you know, am I supposed to be doing this? You know, is this what I'm supposed to be? Am I supposed to be taking this kid out of this country? And I finally kind of came to the conclusion that there were a lot of things that were not right about this, you know, all the things that Mioch has suggested, but that on another level, I can't totally transform the horrible Peruvian economy where people are literally starving to death. I can't do anything about my country and what they do and don't do in
Yes, you
Peru.
can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Oh, I can do some. I can do a little bit. I've been in protest movements trying to stop wars and trying to stop our government from spending millions and billions of dollars on war. You know, I've stood out there with my placard. You know, I've done. So what I'm trying to say is, I know that there is a limit to what I can do, either as an individual or as a member of a protest movement and all this kind of stuff. So that. I just kind of came down on the idea of the humanitarian level is that I agree completely that people just kind of jumping on a plane and saying, well, gee, you know, I can get a kid faster in Peru than the U.S., so let's go to Peru. I mean, there are people that do this. I mean, it's incredible. One woman said, well, gee, I think we'll go to Romania because we can save a little bit on our airplane fare than if we go to Peru. You know, I mean, you know, I just, but I think to me, the only way that I could live with it as a mother of one of these children is to try to do it in a reasoned approach and I try to be aware of what I'm doing, and I'm really rambling, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the moderate approach is better. I mean, be aware that international adoptions are not necessarily the perfect answer for anybody's needs, but that if it's done humanely on the part of the adoptive parent, and they try to be aware of the children, their needs, which I've tried to do, maybe it'll work reasonably well. But there are no easy answers, because the reason I jumped into this has to do with like the whole thing with black children, because what is so incredible is that the pendulum just swings, and this is why I can't get real excited when somebody comes onto me with a real doctrinaire approach, because I mean, several years ago it was like trending. What was that, I guess in the 70s, early to mid 70s, it was kind of like trendy to adopt like black children or mixed racial children by white families, you know.
Well, do you think it's trendy now to be adopting children from other countries?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Yes,
But
okay,
let me just finish my point. Okay, so there was it was trendy to do it, okay? Then, you know, there was the whole thing with the black social workers, and they said, no, it shouldn't be done because then the black children will lose their heritage, okay? So then there was that trend, and so then I just recently got an issue of Hours magazine, which is an adoptive magazine, and the new editor is a black man. And
I think you should point out that Hours is by of and for adoptive parents, so it's the converted speaking to the converted.
Yeah, well, his editorial, I was trying to read his, and it's like his stand is the idea, well, we shouldn't be encouraging all these international adoptions because we've got all of these black children here who are, you know, just wasting away in foster families, so we've got to do something about that. But he didn't really come out and say what he thought the answer was. You know, should we encourage the adoption of all of these black children by black families, or should we now swing back to encouraging white families? I mean, it gets really confusing what's okay.
Well, I think also that you know, black families need to be encouraged. There's a problem with the system. Black families really need to be encouraged to adopt children who are black, and black families are being encouraged. So, I mean, I don't think some of us are misinformed about this. I mean, I don't think everybody's got all the information regarding Because I have problems with adoption, period, all right? Now, I mean, if it was up to me, I'd want the birth mothers to try to keep the children if they want them. And for the most part, I somehow believed, as an adopted person, that my birth mother wanted to keep me. Okay, now, maybe it's my little, psychosocial fantasy that that I wanted to be kept. But, as reality has it, I wasn't. So, we talk about, adoption itself is like, is it right, is it wrong, is it good, is it bad? It's a situation, it's a circumstance right now. It's an industry, it's, and it needs to be looked at. And this is an opportunity to look at it. And, I'm all for good intentions. And I believe that most adopted parents have really good intentions. My parents, I love them dearly. They love me. We have our problems. Everybody has problems in the family. What family is not dysfunctional in some way or another? What child hasn't gone through adolescence? The painful, agonizing experience of adolescence. Mine was painful and agonizing. I never want to go back. But it was exacerbated and compounded by the fact that I was adopted and Asian. Okay, now that's what it comes down to. I can talk about how wonderful my adoption was. I'm not going to. I'm not going to. I'm not going to, pat my parents on the back. They have been patted on the back enough times. They know that they did an okay job. I'm not a drug abuser. I'm not in jail. I'm not in an institution. I haven't got,
But we're not Christian.
Who cares? Who cares? It's like, the adoption, it's like, the whole premise of adoption itself is a real hard concept for me as well, is because it's around ownership. I want this child for me. This is my child now. I can name this child and mold it like Midori was saying. I came as a 5-year-old. I was not, sure, I was influenced by my nurturance and my environment. But, truth of the matter is, I'm me. And, I buy into that. I buy into that also, that mentality, because I want a child of my own too. I want somebody to look like me. I want to be able to resemble somebody. I want that kind of connection that I know that most adopted parents want. And it gets confusing, to coin Midori's word, when the child doesn't look like you and happens to be from another country. So it's just, it gets complicated. I'm rambling here because I'm just hearing like you trying to justify yourself, your actions, and this is really hard. These are really hard. There's no like this is it and this is not it.
It's not clear cut. No.
And my opinions are mine only. And someone asked me, do you compare your issues with your other friends who are Korean and adopted? Look, each one of us are unique and individual. I can't, so Peter, who's a friend of mine, says he didn't deal with racism. And I can think, well, maybe he's really blocked. But, maybe he didn't. If he says he didn't, it's valid. But I'm going to say for myself, I went through these experiences. This is my situation. This is where I'm not, it's like, this is it. This is how I feel. This is where I come from. And, my parents, whatever they want to say or feel, they can. They're entitled to it.
When I hear these words, dire need, that people think that these people in other countries have this dire need. We're hearing these words a lot, but we don't hear enough of the words about how the birth mother feels and about taking the child away from the birth mother. And how about if we really care, how about giving the money there to help these people keep their children? And I want to know, is there somebody in Korea who can stand up and speak out against these adoptions?
There are people underground.
We're going to.
People underground. It's really hard. We're talking about, cultural issues and a social system that is, also adoption, the whole concept of adoption is a westernized concept. the whole, this woman, I forgot her name, but anyway, she wrote this book. The first book she wrote was Women in Madness, which was in the 1970s. Phyllis Chesler, thank you, I knew somebody would know. She wrote a book called The Case of Baby M in a very feminist journalistic perspective, and she's got this one chapter on it's called Pound for Flesh.
You're doing my next workshop. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm sorry. Anyway, she does this really good chapter on adoption and how the whole how the whole concept of selling babies for money exchange is a westernized concept that in Korea for centuries, undocumented, thousands of years, as in the Native Americans and every other quote-unquote indigenous native culture, Eskimos, South Americans, Black African Americans, took care of their own kin. They call it kinship. They took care of their own. They passed their children on to others, a relative, a cousin, an aunt, uncle, whatever blood we're talking about. And they never passed papers and did legalization and ownership papers. And my adoption papers were stamped alien when I arrived. I mean, come on, this is like. I didn't, this is what the U.S. has done, and white men, yes, white men, I'm sorry to say, are the ones who develop these policies and pass these laws. They're the judicial systems who say, this is the control we're going to have over a woman's body, that if you relinquish a child, you can never legally take this child back. This child is no longer legally yours. I think birth mothers are getting a shaft in a big way. I think that that the adoption industry has been promoted for the adoptive parents only. And only in the last few years has a triad come up and said, and the AAC said, look, there are two other points. There are two other parties that are being, grossly neglected. And we're going to stand up and we're going to say, look, we want to be heard, we want to be seen. And I really think that adoptees and birth mothers have been exploited in a major way.
I'm an adoptee from Greece, so I feel somewhat of an intermediary here, and I find myself agreeing. You call yourself
Milk.
You call yourself Milk. And I find myself agreeing with Milk completely. I had a very much intact family in Greece until my mother died when my twin brother and I were 2 years old, and she was 40, and I can assure you the family desperately wanted to keep us. It was the economics of the situation, a small farm trying to support that number of people with one less helping body around. So I can tell you that, first of all, the family wanted desperately to keep me. I found this out years later. And yes, I have been back to Greece. I've had the luxury you two have not had of going back to the village, to the farm, to the house where I was born, where my siblings were raised. And I'll be the first to admit that the first trip to Greece, I wasn't thrilled with the living conditions. But after 2 more trips there, and I thought about it, going from Greece and then going home to my 2 cars, 3 VCRs, and 5 TV sets, I sat down and asked, am I happier than they are? Because I have 2 cars and 3 VCRs. And fundamentally, again, the economics coming up, they're far, far happier in the village than I am. They don't have a 45-minute commute to work each way. So yes, economics is important, and to think that if a child is not adopted, there is no other alternative. I do question our alternatives, helping the bio family, the mother in particular.
And if there aren't any alternatives, create them and work towards it. Lobby, legislate, do anything you possibly can.
The other thing, part of this, I'm a birth parent and an adoptive parent and a social worker. And for me, in terms of my birth parenthood, many of us were raised in the Christian ethic that you're speaking of. And so the economics weren't the major factor. I mean, you're coming from your perspective, and we can all only come from our own, but for some people, they're in a situation where just having money would not solve the problem, first of all. Second of all, the reason they're not using that kinship approach is because those of us who were raised with a very strict Christian upbringing believe that what happened was such a sin. I, for one, my family never knew that I had a child. I mean, they specifically did not know. I mean, certainly did not know. because this was such a terrible sin. So that's another factor, another reason why.
Yeah, the
At
social
least for
cultural
people,
issues.
women my age, it's not happening so much with girls now. Many more people are
Well, it's more
keeping, and
acceptable to
they're
keep their
more
children now.
acceptable. But in my day and age, it wasn't acceptable at all.
Right.
And so families weren't told. So even if someone had said, hey, I'll give you $1,000 a month, put you up in your own apartment, wouldn't make no difference, because for me, that would have been an admission that I had.
I mean, it's very complicated because you're talking about, white girls who are now able to keep their children and providing services and available access to keep their children. However, what about the African American and Latino women who aren't able to keep their children and giving up right and left, or they're putting them onto welfare and they buy into the welfare system and they stay on the welfare system. They become victims of the welfare system for years. I mean, none of it is perfect, and there's social cultural concepts around here. There's social cultural issues that have to do with around being a person of color and being white and the privileges. I mean, as a white woman, people, being white, I know for a fact I had the privileged trappings. I lived them. I was raised white. I know what it's like to be raised white. But I lived the privileged trappings, but I didn't get them. You know what I mean? I could still walk down the street and be made fun of. So, it's like, I know what it's...
They're both lives.
Right. Or, partly. And it's just... So, I know for a fact that white people have more privileges. A white man has even more privileges. I mean, okay, so it's like... So, my big issue around adoption is it has to do with women. It has to do with children. It has to do with, oppressed groups. And it's just, as a woman of color, I'm a woman of color, I'm adopted, and I'm a lesbian, I'm left-handed. I mean, I can think of 1,000 things that I have, I'm a minority in, quote-unquote minority. So I've had to struggle twice as hard to be half as accepted. And it's like, so you talk, the whole adoption system is exploits. It's exploitative. And who's being exploited? That's my question. Who's not being exploited is another question.
But, it's easy to talk about, where we're angry and what the imperfections are. The reality is that it happens, and there are good results that come out of it.
This is the end of Tape A. Please continue on to Tape B. The American Adoption Congress, 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991 in Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape number 60B.
I found that's been kind of interesting is that you can stand on both sides of the fence in a lot of ways. I mean, inside I'm white, and I understand where a white person's coming from when they're saying something to maybe another Asian person. I'll often understand where that Asian person's like completely offended. And maybe, it's one of the few good things that comes out of it, but you have sympathy for both sides. And it maybe makes you a stronger person in dealing with the society and standing up for me, for Asian rights and for women's rights, but for Asian rights, knowing how the system works and really understanding the white society, really understanding. I mean, I'm not just talking about reading about it and living with it, but living at home with it and being brought up in it. It makes, I think, the Asian white so powerful to be a real spokesperson and a real person to cause change for the Asian society, or at least for our society, and for you in the Greek society, or whatever you happen to represent. When you represent both and you really get to know both, it really allows you a really unique opportunity.
Carrie, I'd just like to get back to the realities of the situation. You talked about the fact that there is no domestic adoption in Korea. Is that right?
Very little.
Okay.
Very little.
That, from what I understand, that's kind of the same thing in Peru. But I don't want to get off that. What I wanted to get back is, and this is just something I read recently, and I think that this is correct, is that in Korea, a lot of the, I guess you would call it the social standing has to do with the father and inheritance.
And I was reading that if a woman gives birth to a child illegitimately, that a child is almost like a non-person. In other words, you can't do this, that, and the other. And there was like a whole list of things, and I don't remember all the details. But it sounded to me that that women who do give birth illegitimately in Korea, their children have an extremely difficult time, so that just because of the Korean culture, the way they perceive things and do things, so that was another reason apparently.
You can't get married.
Why, huh?
You can't get married. I mean, it's considered a real success story if an orphan or, you know, one that doesn't...
An orphan can't get...
No, they can. I'm not saying that they physically can't, but it's very difficult to get married if you don't have a family background. It's considered a real success story, and they always put it in the cult bulletin when one of the adoptees or one of the kids that didn't get adopted actually gets married. Every once in a while you see a big white wedding dress. Yeah.
But so I guess what I'm trying to say is, so that as I understand it, that's why in Korea, international adoption was perceived as a way to give a life for certain kinds. I'm just you know, that to give, in other words, to give some sort of a life where a child would not be considered an outcast in their own culture. And I understand that was very similar also in Vietnam, I think, that certain, in other words, biracial children born of American soldiers and Vietnamese women
that's
were
a
really
political issue.
Were really shunned by Vietnamese people, or Vietnamese culture, and that's why. And I don't. So what I'm saying is that in that situation, then might not international adoption be a positive thing?
It's a safety valve for the
It's
country
an
of
excuse.
origin to perpetuate a patriarchal system that exploits women and children.
Yeah.
You develop a safety valve.
Thank you.
So what you do is you export your problem, and therefore you simply continue the system because you show everyone how perfect it is, but you swept the problem under the rug and across the country.
And made a profit on it. Now,
That's the best part, the profit.
I think that, first of all, I don't like the word illegitimate because, you know, birth mothers who have children when they're not married, the child is legitimate. The child is a real child. It happens to be living and breathing usually. And so it's like you're sort of pregnant, you either are or not. So I have a real problem with that word. And, you know, like this woman said, just perpetuates the whole myth and stereotypes around the social, cultural, you know, wow, these people in Korea, they will reject the child if the child is considered an orphan. Or if they're institutionalized, they don't get the education, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't know how I would have turned out if I had stayed in Korea. Yeah, it was a pretty dismal place. Yep, I know that much. But I don't know how I would have turned out. So it's like, what if, you know, what if I had stayed in Korea? Would I be sitting in a rice paddy counting my, you know, rice fields? Or, you know, or would I have gotten an education? Or would I have been, you know, plastered on a whole newsletter with a white wedding dress? Or would I be in the closet underground in the lesbian and gay community? You know, who knows? Who knows these things? Now, yeah, I'm glad that I'm here. I'm glad I'm here in the U.S. But I paid a heavy price that I continue to pay. Every time I speak out, I have to pay it. You know, over and over again. And I'll be paying it till I die. Because the adoption issue the adoption process does not go away. It's like, oh, I'm here. Let's get into my, you know, 1991 Subaru and drive off into La La Land. No, it doesn't happen.
The thing is, though, what the question I always want to ask is, and not only what is the answer, but is there an answer? Because the thing is, okay, so you can say, well, so we're not going to give Korea or Peru, you know, a safety valve to deal with all of these things which, you know, say they might consider a problem. We're gonna not have international adoption, so we're gonna force Peru to deal with all of its children who are dying of hunger, literally.
We shouldn't.
I mean, is that
Is that
gonna work?
true?
Is that
Is
gonna
it
work?
true that-
Yes, when I was
Yeah?
there.
Okay,
when
well,
I
if
was
it's
there,
true,
I was
then-
told by someone who had talked to a UN worker that
Okay.
in the emergency zones in Peru where the guerrilla war is going on, that like 1 out of about
And what's
10
happening in the
children died.
backyards of, what's happening in East LA?
Well, it's
You know?
pretty
Right,
terrible
it's pretty
there.
dismal.
Pretty
What's
terrible
happening in
there,
the
too.
ghettos of, Harlem, okay? So it's just like, we want to reach out to other countries. Fine, that's really, that's glorious. That's very admirable.
Well, what I'm trying to say, let's just take this as a supposition, okay? Because this is important to me. This is important to me, as an adopted parent. All right, so let's just say, all right, so we're not going to adopt children from Peru. Let's take that because that's what I know something about. And we're going to say, I'd like to believe that sending money down there would solve the problem. I'm not even sure that would do it because I know, frankly, of the amount of corruption. I know a little bit about how Peruvian culture works in the government, and I know where money goes.
So the U.S. is corrupt too.
Oh, I know that too. Listen,
Look, we're badgering here. At this point, I think, you did a really...
I don't know what the answer is.
I think-
That's what I'm
I think
saying.
what you
I'd like to
need-
know. I wish there was an
This is
answer.
this is the sense that I get. I think
Yeah.
the sense that I get from you as an adopted parent is that you need to be reassured that you did an okay thing. You did, all right? You did an all right. You justify your thing is justified. But I know I can feel this, that it's very hard for you to sit here and listen to me. I'm the first person to admit that I'm very hard to listen to, okay? Because I come off as militant and very dogmatic. But look, this is where I'm at. Now, I'm not going to give you accolades. I'm not going to applaud you. You did what you needed to do for yourself. You got a kid. You got a kid from Peru.
Well,
So you can justify it all you want. That's fine.
I'm not trying
But
to
I'm not going to
justify it
sit
for
here
me.
and I'm not going to sit here
yeah.
and say,
Yeah,
great.
I'm not trying to justify it for myself. What I do feel, these are questions that I'm asking because I felt like there were a lot of adoptive parents who came down there that didn't have good information. And really
Well, I'm hoping that what you do
Right.
is you take responsibilities upon yourself to educate these adopted parents,
Yeah, and
so that I
my
don't
question for
have
me
to.
is, should I be encouraging Peruvian adoptions? Because I came back wanting to be an adoption consultant to assist American.
Well, what do you
Americans
think after you listen to us?
What I want to do.
What do you think about that? You can think about it. You don't have to answer now, but think about
What I
it.
would like to do is two things. I feel the need to try to work on both levels, and I don't know whether this is possible. I would like to really try to educate North Americans who go down there to a lot of these issues that you raised. One is, how do you prepare people for the realities of what they're getting into? The other thing is, I've listened real carefully to a lot of the sessions on birth mothers, and I would love to find some way to try to work with birth mothers in Peru. And right now, that's still a very vague, hazy notion, and I don't quite know how to do it. But I know
So
that
much
there
of it's underground.
Yeah, but there are Peruvian women, who help birth mothers there and who are interested in doing it in a really humane way to help these women.
Let me give you another idea. Let me give you another scenario of what's happening down in South America specifically, okay? There are children disappearing off the streets, all right? Why are these children disappearing off the streets? Okay, poverty and war and blah, blah, blah. But you know what? These children are showing up in adoption agencies and lawyers' offices as children that are available for adoption. A lot of these women have not given up willingly relinquished their children. They're disappearing, which means that they're being stolen and brought through the black baby market through the U.S. They come through Texas and land up in the southern states. And I know this is happening for a fact. I know it.
I know that it is too.
Okay,
I don't
so,
know
you
I don't
know-
know what the percentage is, but it does.
Well, it doesn't matter what the percentage is. It's happening.
I don't know.
But I don't know that the answer is just don't do adoptions. I mean, it can't, because there is need going on, and there is problems with the whole process. So I think it really needs to be a two sort of thing, helping with the process to make sure it's done humanely and legally,
Legally.
but I mean, working through the system properly, but also trying to find ways to allow these birth mothers to keep their children.
Does anybody have any other questions? Because
Sorry.
really, does anybody have any other comments, questions, attacks?
I just like to thank you both for coming, and you particularly, Miyok, am I saying it right?
Yes.
I'm a birth mother who was born knowing I never wanted to be a parent, ever wanted to be a parent. And I saw a program when I was about 8 years old on television that happened to fit right into my scenario because it was about the overpopulation of the world, and I thought, okay, and this has been sort of my cause since forever. It is the environmental issue, it's overpopulation. I happen to be extremely lucky. Nobody coerced me to give up my child. I knew I was not going to be the kind of parent I wanted my child to have. She happens to have had great parents, as much as I can know about that. And so I feel a lot different than a lot of people in the whole adoption issue. And one thing that tremendously has disturbed me lately is this whole travesty going on in Romania, which isn't the only place. It's just getting all the attention. So
Media hype.
I've been very encouraged to hear that you're speaking out this way, taking this kind of a risk, letting people know that we as Yanks, as I call us, I have traveled, I know what you're saying.
I think Romania is now where Greece was 30 years ago.
Yeah, and we look at people like, oh, they've got a dirt floor. This is absolute horrible poverty in the U.S. But, like you say, about your VCRs, your TVs, people on welfare here have color TVs. These things are not necessary for a happy life. I think what you've done is given us some things to work with, to think about, that go much deeper than what we're normally talking about, even in adoption, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody who wants to sign up for any of my articles, feel free to fill out, sign up your name.
This concludes this session.